Hello and welcome to another Mass Medic webinar. If you're just joining us, we were giving everyone a moment to log on, but I think we can go ahead and get started. So today we have our friends from Deloitte, and we're going to be talking about 2023 year in review of the diagnostics marketplace. We have a great conversation for you. Before I turn it over to our moderator for today, just have a few quick housekeeping notes. For those of you who are not familiar with Mass Medic, I'm our director of Marcom. My name is Nicole Owens, and our organization works to bolster the medtech industry primarily in New England through education, connection, advocacy, and awareness. The presentation today is being recorded, so anyone who registered for it will receive a copy of the video after the webinar. We're also going to have time for Q&A, so please make sure to put your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, and we will do our best to answer them as time allows. All right, without further ado, I am pleased to turn it over to our moderator for today. Sujay is the managing partner of MedTech for Deloitte, and he's going to be leading our conversation today. Sujay.
Thank you, Nicole, and thanks, Mass Medic, for hosting this webinar. Thanks everyone for joining. I still see people trickling in, so hoping that people would be able to kind of join in pretty soon and kind of be able to listen to Mara talk about what's in store for 2024, as well as a quick year in review of 2023. That's what we have in store for today. A brief about me before we get started. Mara, maybe we want to go to the introduction slide. I'm a managing director partner at Deloitte. I lead MedTech commercial strategy. I also co-lead our Deloitte Diagnostics Center of Excellence here at Deloitte, which is an industry practice that's focused on the IVD diagnostics sector, as well as bringing the entire diagnostics industry under a single umbrella entity, which focuses on building thought leadership content, collaterals, and solutions specific to the diagnostics industry in terms of managing some of the challenges that are specific to diagnostics. And our relationship with Mara has been going on for several years now. Strong marketplace collaboration in place, which started pre-COVID as well as continuing post-COVID. Worked together when Mara was part of the Rockefeller Foundation and did some COVID testing related work together. And proud to say that Deloitte has been closely working with Mara in the Diagnostics Year in Review as well. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Mara. She's a well-known thought leader in the industry. She, if you're not familiar with Mara, I would probably just Google her name. She does a very, amazing newsletter called Sensitivity and Specificity, and I'll let Mara speak through her piece as well.
Well, thank you, Sujay, for that introduction. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. I will also, let me thank Mass Medic for having this event, and thank Deloitte for your moderating and your continued work in the diagnostics industry. So I am Mara Aspinall, very proud to be here. I'm a partner at Illumina Ventures. I've been called a diagnostic evangelist. Most of my career has been focused in the diagnostics arena. I believe that diagnostics are the absolute key to an efficient and effective healthcare system, and one in which, it's the glue that holds everything together. So with that, for the last 6 years, I have been focused on reporting on the industry, and I do that from a number of different perspectives. I'm the co-founder of the School of Diagnostics at Arizona State University. to ensure that people in life sciences and healthcare and clinical arena really understand the impact of diagnostics and the important role that it plays in research and in clinical work. And I spent my career at Roche Tissue Diagnostics, Genzyme Genetics. But with that, today, I'm proud to be a partner at Illumina Ventures. There are a couple of questions, and I'll just emphasize the fact that Illumina Ventures is an independent venture capital firm. It is not a CVC of Illumina, but rather our roots came from there, but we're an independent firm managed separately. We focus on genomics 3.0 and really look to genomics leaders, and we have a lot of knowledgeable operators. But today, we're going to be talking about the Diagnostics Year in Review. As Sujay said, 2023, what happened? And what is the importance of 2024? As we go through this, feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box, particularly while I'm presenting. If you have clarifying questions, feel free to ask them while I'm presenting. And then at the end, I'm happy to take any additional questions. So I'm going to talk about 4 sections. What are the key observations I see? What are the financial results, including a proprietary index that I've put together? What are the operating metrics in the industry, including a new section on CEO profiles? And what are the important trends that you need to know for innovation? So first, and I'm assuming you're seeing the slides move now, I have 5 major observations on the year that's passed, but very relevant to the future. Number 1, the financial value of diagnostic companies, unfortunately, is down. And not only to pre-pandemic levels, in many areas, they're below pandemic levels. And we'll talk about that in terms of stock prices, M&A, IPO, and the capital markets. Secondly, regulatory rules have tightened in the EU, and I believe will be tightening much more aggressively in the US. This is an important week. The House just announced some hearings on the LDT rule. So we will see much more to come here. But we'll talk about the biomarker mandates in the US states. Third, reimbursement, have and have nots. There are some companies that have done very well with differentiated tests and that have strong market share, but in general, volume remains flat to down. Number 4, it's what we call genomics 3.0. And the irony is genomics 3.0 is all about things beyond genomics. It's omics, from fragmentomics to spatial omics to proteomics, a number of different technologies, but basically looking at nucleic acids. And lastly, and those of you who I have talked to in the past have heard me say this time and time again, it's all about education. And for the very first time, and I won't go through detail on this, but if you want my newsletter discussion on it, I'll happy to get it to you. But study after study shows that physicians do not understand how to use diagnostics. And as a result, patients are being harmed. And I'm not talking about small hospitals and tiny practices that have one doctor. I'm talking academic medical centers where 1/3 of the patients did not get the correct diagnosis. So this is key. So those are the overall implications. Now I'm going to go through a fair number of slides. I'm going to go through them quickly. It's a pretty sophisticated audience, and we will, as Sujay said, we'll make this available to everybody after the session, so you can go through the slides and ask further questions. So next, let's talk about financial results. What did they say? It's all about following the money. Let's follow the money. First, the stock index. And this is my own, I'll call it proprietary. You could put your own together, but it's been a lot of work to look at the what I call the mega DX stock index. And for comparison, so you understand this chart, there are 4 different content pieces here. At the very top is the S&P 500 in blue dotted line. Since the beginning of the pandemic, it's up 48%. If you look at the Mega DX, that's the red line, we are only up 3%. But there's a big difference between the biggest stocks and the smallest stocks. Those with a market value more than $1 billion are up 11, and those smaller stocks, some not very small, but still smaller, are down 9% since the beginning of pandemic. It's pretty obvious as you look at this chart that we had a huge bump, particularly the smaller stocks in 2021, but almost since the end of 2021, it's been all downhill. The larger stocks have been a much lower beta, and have not been as volatile, but the big ones have gone from top to bottom. So if that's the stock index, what about IPOs? Everybody talks about those, and I've been doing this now since 2015. So the question is, if you bought $1 of these diagnostic company IPOs at their IPO price, would you be making money or losing money? And the sad fact is any of the pandemic IPOs, you'd be losing money today, anywhere from basically 97% down to 22% down is the best case. Some of the earlier ones have done better and have continued to fare well. So you could see the names of the companies here in green. Do I expect this to rebound? I do. Will it be everybody in the marketplace? No. A number of these companies, for a variety of reasons, have been acquired, have shut down, have gone into bankruptcy. I think we will see a small class in 2024, while there was a zero class in 2023. So I think there's a rebound, but will it all be high greens? It will not be. My prediction. I hope I'm wrong. The other thing we look at a financial basis is M&A deals. And here, once again, 2023 was a zero. There were no diagnostic IPOs and there were no diagnostic large M&A deals. And a couple people asked, what about Abcam? I was on the board there. Olink, which has not been completed. We put those in life science tools. They are not majority diagnostic companies, and that's why they're not on the 2023 list. So you get a sense of the excitement that happened during the pandemic, some of which are directly related to COVID, many of which are not related to COVID, but you can see what that looks like. Most of our acquirers in this industry are strategic buyers, not private equity, but a few private equity. So now let's take that and let's look at the smaller deals. And what you see in 2023 is there were 22 deals of the year. 16 of those had financials announced. Typically, the smaller deals don't announce financials. I can't be sure of that, but typically the smaller deals don't announce it. You can see some of the larger deals on the right with 2023 examples, but what you see here is, from a high of 400 million on average, we're down to 150. Still higher than 2020 and 2019 in those early years, but still not terribly high. For great returns for investors, but the smaller deals are happening, and I predict we'll continue to see those happen going into 2024. Well, if we're going to sell a deal, the company needs money to go forward. That's why we look at the venture capital environment. And no surprise to any of you, I'm sure if you're in the industry at all, that there was a lot of money that went in those pandemic years, 2021, 2022. I'll say in 23, we got back to the normative numbers of where we were in 2020. Virtually all of our deals are venture versus private equity, but there have been some private equity deals going forward. In terms of the number of deals, you see the focus here in terms of deal count. I think there's an error here, so I'll correct it in terms of the switch between venture and private equity. So that gives you a sense of the financials. By no means is it all doom and gloom, but the hope that the pandemic would get us to a new higher level of financial success, unfortunately, has sat back, and we're back down to where we were pre-pandemic. But now let's look at what I call the operating metrics and how that looks as an industry. So first, FDA approvals. There's a lot said about artificial intelligence, right? Everybody's talking about AI, and a lot of the information is all about AI in terms of diagnostics. It sounds terrific, but when you look at it, what you see is we expect roughly 200 plus AI related or ML related enabled medical devices, essentially tests, but 80% of them are radiology focused. So this is not some brand new area. This is really a continuation of systems that help radiologists look at data. But we are seeing some change, cardiovascular 71, neurology 20. The rest of them are not meaningful, just a handful of approvals. I do expect this to continue. And by the way, the reason 2023 is dotted line here is the FDA, for also reasons I don't understand, announces these fully mid-year. So we can only assume the second half of the year will be roughly equal to the first half of the year. So I am expecting an up year, but still radiology focused. So let's go from there to companion diagnostics. This is an area that has been up and down and up and down. But what we saw was 2023 is a really important year with PMA approvals, not 510Ks. Some select examples are on the right, some very important tests. And this clearly has taken hold in the industry. But if you look a little bit more carefully, what you see is over 50% of the CDX are based on 5 biomarkers. So just because there's larger numbers over the years, they're not all independent. The 88 PMAs plus the 73, they're not all new ones. Many of them are just different companies looking at the same markers, but still good to see those numbers up. But maybe what's even more important is how do we look at this from a pharma point of view? And I found this actually quite astounding. If you look at all of the NMEs, the new medical entities, and where does this come from? How many of those are biomarker dependent? We were running at about a third. We're up now to 38% of all the new drugs coming through had some mention of a biomarker in its approval. That to me is big progress. So when you talk about progress, we have to look at what testing looked like, and what does routine testing look like. So this is data from Xiphon, and they looked at overall routine, and in this case, COVID PCR testing. So this is lab-based, does not count the tests at home. And they started in January 2019. And as you could see here, we know this light teal area here is all COVID tests. But what's interesting is it's pretty clear by the beginning of 21, Q1, March 21, the overall lab volumes were back to pre-pandemic levels. We know what happened in 2020 and how far down it was. But it gets more interesting because I wanted to look at the sub areas of the lab volume index. And what you see in these sub areas is clinical very similar to the overall. Immunology, microbiology up a little bit. Pathology in general is down, but what's changed is molecular and genetic. Probably intuitively not a surprise. I was a bit surprised to see it up quite so much and all the others be flat over this period of time. I think as we came out of the pandemic in 2023 and virtually every area renormalized, it'll be very interesting to see this in 2024. So that gives you a sense overall. Who are the labs doing this? Well, those of you in the direct lab industry, and clearly with Massmedic, many of you sell to the labs. I thought that this was an interesting chart to look at. Number one insight is that 50,000 new CLIA labs were certified during the pandemic. That slowed a lot in 2022 and now again in 2023. I expected it to slow down even more, and I think it will slow down. That many of these, I don't think we'll see anywhere near the number of new labs. Quite the contrary, we will see the number of labs being active and available to reduce further in 2024. So the tail of this was a little longer than I expected, but we will not see without another pandemic such a large number of CLIA labs out there. When you talk about CLIA and you start to talk about LDTs, you really have to understand the regulatory and legislative update. Again, you may be familiar with these. I'm just going to give them short shrift here to say these were the major 3 things that I believe happened in 2023. Number one is the FDA proposed rule around LDTs. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. And what's going to happen is widely expected. I don't know if it's going to happen, but the FDA will publish that rule, and there'll probably be some challenges to that, but we'll see. Secondly, new approach to greater transparencies regarding oncology drug tests. And why is that important? Because with this new approach, where the drug tests have to meet, the oncology drug tests have to meet certain standards, it will involve the corresponding companion IVDs. So this is a key piece. Does not today formally include LDTs, really focused on the IVD part of the market. And then lastly, TSET, which many of you may have heard of, it really talks about the Medicare coverage of innovative technologies. And this now goes to emerging technologies. This was meant to say, let's get innovative products that new companies are doing through coverage determination earlier. But what's our problem? It's not clear diagnostics are going to be included. I wanted to emphasize that in case any of you are part of regulatory lobbying or otherwise. It's important to know that as of now, it's not clear that diagnostics will be included, and I'm going to say it really needs to be. So that gives you a sense from the high level, but what's been happening on an individual state basis? Well, we saw something happen in 2023 has not happened a lot, which is these biomarker testing mandates. 25 states in all, 15 states were done by the end of the year, 10 states pending. It's widely expected that they will go through. And what this mandates, each state's a little bit different, but what it mandates is the fact that any biomarker test that's ordered by a physician that has FDA approval or part of the industry guidelines must be approved. So this is a payer mandate, happened on IVF, happened in a lot of other areas. I think for the industry, this is good news. There are some controversies here, so not everybody is fully convinced today it's good news. Most of the companies that are impacted for this have not gone out to say what's the impact of this on their financials, because it's too early to tell. What is good about it is it says these biomarkers must be paid for, and I think that helps education in the field. What is bad about it, but probably realistic, is it does not say what is happening in terms of the reimbursement rate. So it says it has to be reimbursed, but doesn't say what the rate is. So that's the US. I want to acknowledge briefly what's happening. Yeah, is there a question?
Yeah, there is a question from Robert. Question is, how is TSET different from NTAP on the previous slide? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not the best person to do this, but let me give it at a high level. TSET is focused on the Medicare coverage, and NTAP is focused mostly on devices. And in this sense, the devices were defined as not diagnostics, true devices, and talks about reimbursement. But Robert, let me get back to you to ensure that I've interpreted that correctly. But good question. So to go back, let's look at Europe. Those of you who are working in Europe, who have products in Europe, are probably aware that the European IVD medical regulation, IVDR, came into effect in 22. And the process to get recertified under the new rules will probably take at least 2 years. And essentially from a system that was pretty much all focused on individual self-approval, it's gotten much more intensified in every way. The proponents would say it brings better tests there, brings more transparency and oversight. I'm not going to argue one side or another because this is law and it's going forward. What might that look like? How long will it take? There are a lot of debates, but this looks at one of the biggest consultants in Europe and looks at their time frame.
It may go further now for the Class C devices, but it essentially starts a process. Many will say that as a result of this, there'll be smaller tests that are no longer on the market. So we'll have to see how that comes out. And in 2024, the next year's report, I will certainly update all of.
Lastly, I want to talk about important trends in innovation. And here I see 4 major areas. One is multiomics, which I spoke about briefly at the beginning. Secondly, AI and diagnostics. We're no different from any other industry. AI is critical. Third, liquid biopsy, and I define liquid biopsy as twofold. One is MRD, the mineral residual test, and secondly are the MCED tests, the multi-cancer early diagnosis. And to be fair, some of them are going to be SCED, single cancer early diagnosis. What I believe is going to happen in the future are those are going to expand. And lastly, something that a lot of people are not talking about is new sample taking technology. And the team at Deloitte was very helpful in putting this together and having our thoughts together about what are the key issues going forward. So I started on this, and I call it Genomics 3.0. Genomics was just the start, but it fostered a whole ecosystem in terms of different omics that are going forward. And if you had a little horse race between all of them, you would see that, the microbiome seemed like it was going far ahead, that slowed down. Metabolomics looked very exciting, slowed down. Where now single cell and fragmentomics and spatial omics are the exciting areas. I'm not here to say any one of them. I believe if we look back 10 years from now and we look at 2024, we're going to see all of these move forward in a significant way, but for very specific indications. And then secondly, we're going to see that all these are only possible with AI enhancement. I think they'll get approvals test by test in the clinical area, probably initially without AI enhancement as the FDA and others are learning about it. And then we'll have machine learning and AI added to it to make it even more sensitive and specific. Next, perfect segue to AI. And I think diagnostics is going to be the cutting edge of where AI comes in. So you can pick your favorite part of this: pre-analytic, analytic, adverse event reporting. I think the first area is going to be in report generation. And if anyone's used ChatGPT, you can already start doing that to say, I'm going to load my pathology report, tell me what this means in plain English, or load a whole series of symptoms that are not about any one test, but 10 tests that a patient took and a family history, and that AI will have an answer. Is it right? It's up to you and your doctor, but it certainly starts giving you a differential analysis. Next, liquid biopsy. I'm sure all of you know about liquid biopsy and the importance of this. As I said, I separated in 2 different pieces, and they're in different parts of the industry. I think the key thing here is in blood and in cancer, these are here to stay. They have proven enough. Will MCED be reimbursed? That's a bit trickier, but I think the use of these on different ends of the market are here to stay. I think they'll improve their sensitivity and hopefully their false negative rate. When you look at a lot of these tests, they're excellent at diagnosing stage 2 and stage 3 cancers, not quite as good at stage 1. They are good at stage 4, but stage 4 would probably be picked up by other tests. But is there a place for these tests, and will they grow? I believe they will grow, and they will grow aggressively. MRD, in terms of disease monitoring, this is a key piece of the ecosystem. If we have time, I'll share a slide that I've done separate from the report, but I really think about diagnosis or diagnostics in 5 categories, starting with screening, then going to diagnosis, prognosis, theranostics, and monitoring. And I think this becomes the major monitoring test out there. What is the key piece for 2024 and beyond? It's all about new sample types and new diseases. It will not stay in just blood and will not stay in just cancer. That will be the difference from them being a reasonably sized market to being a much larger market. And lastly, on the innovative front, this is to me tremendously exciting. is that we're no longer using the traditional few sample types. And what were they? It was all blood for the longest time. And then saliva diagnostics have really taken hold, particularly during the pandemic. And there were always a few others. But what have we seen in the last 10 years? We've seen stool be a major contributor to diagnostics with colon cancer tests and otherwise. We've seen urine do more and more tests. But we've also seen new ways to think about sweat, blood, voice. Even menstrual blood was one of the tests that have been FDA approved just in the last few months. Gait for Parkinson's disorders, tears for other neurodegenerative disorders. So I think this list will expand. We'll see hair and otherwise as part of this going forward. So I'm excited about what this means in the future. Almost all of these unique tests, particularly breath and cough and voice, are accompanied by an AI algorithm that allows a little bit of change to diagnose some important diseases. So with that, let me give my acknowledgement to the teams that have been tremendously helpful. And as I said, terrific to work with the team at Deloitte and many others to put this together. So I'm happy to take any questions, and particularly if there are other information that you'd like to see, either now if I have it, or in the future, I'm happy to do that. And as you're putting questions in the Q&A, if that's okay, Sujay, I'll just spend 3 more minutes going through the COVID piece, because we have enough time.
And then there are a couple of questions. So why don't you finish this and then we can get to the questions.
Perfect, because we have enough time.
Yes.
No surprise here, this is in the appendix of the report, is that EUAs have gone way down in 2023, but I just want to remind people, the FDA is still issuing EUAs. So this has not finished. The EUA is the only agency, the FDA is the only agency still in COVID pandemic mode. When you look at COVID versus flu, it's pretty dramatic how much more aggressive COVID is versus flu. Even if you look at death rate, which settled at about 0.5%, 0.6, versus flu at 0.1, not surprising. And what's so interesting to me is this COVID variant history, and the fact that we've been lucky enough to be focused now almost 2 years on Omicron related variants. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mara. I think that was a really informative session. Couple of questions that came up. First one by Nick. Thanks for the session. Something I'm curious to learn about is how overall new and changing healthcare delivery channels will improve or harm diagnostic solutions.
So just how will different delivery channels? I'm positive on different delivery channels. I believe that, I'll stick with the US, I believe Americans, and this has been proven out in COVID, are smart enough, are educated enough to get this right. And when you talk about the average American with 4th grade education, I've heard that, I know that. But you know what? When people talk about their own health or their kids' health or their parents' health, they're much more sophisticated than that. And I believe that will continue. So I think it will ultimately help. But I'm a believer in FDA regulation, because what could kill this market is a viral story about a test not working and somebody did it at home and there was harm. So it's critical that education goes along with it. But I'm bullish.
And just to add to that, I think COVID, one thing that's really taught all of us is that, people want more care to be delivered closer to them, whether it's at home or pharmacy nearby or closest ambulatory surgical center. They want, long gone are the days where, people used to travel 50 miles to go to the nearest hospital to get the care that they need. So there is that opportunity driven more from the consumer side for tests as well as care to be delivered closer to them, and that is here to stay. And companies have to kind of adopt to those new channels as well.
I think that's I'm going to make one point. So it's such a good point. And we saw that during COVID when the home tests first came out, they were not successful. Then there were lines and people said, I want what I want now. And once you've tried a home test, assuming you can afford it, so the prices come down, but if you can afford it, it's so much more convenient and you lose less time from work.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question, Mara, is does adenoma detection really matter for CRC? Only 5 to 10% of them eventually convert to cancers.
Yeah, it's a great question of AA for adenomas. I think the answer is when you can do a test like colonoscopy that works so well and dramatically reduce the future risk, I would say yes, it does. Now, if you're talking about the fact that the stool-based tests and even now the blood-based tests do not do a particularly good job to pick up these adenomas, as a clinical society, we've made a peace with that because of the issue that you're saying. But I think that's why people who are high risk are not recommended to use these alternative tests, that they are recommended to go to colonoscopy. So I think we are making do with the fact that a lot of people I don't know what the number is, but it's less than a third, I believe, of people who should have colonoscopies do. So my bias is some testing and some prevention is better than none. So I think it's great to use those tests. Are they perfect? No test is perfect. And no drug is perfect either, by the way, and no procedure is perfect.
Another question from Robert. What's the trend in regards to blending of medical device and IVD as we move towards automated testing and analysis?
So tell me what you mean by that. The blending of IVD and traditional devices. What, Sujay, help me here. What do they mean by that?
The question is, what's the trend in regards to blending of medical device and IVD as we move towards automated testing and analysis? I think if I'm interpreting that question, it's more at the larger centralized labs where there is, labs are getting into more automation in order to cut costs and improve efficiency of testing. And it's the shift towards that automated testing and analysis and what that really means from a med device and an IVD standpoint. That's, I believe, what Robert is, unless I'm misspeaking, Robert, feel free to clarify that. Yeah.
Yes, please feel free to clarify. I think the answer, I hope, and maybe I'll start with I hope, is an integration. And I think AI will help us do that. Is that more of traditional devices versus diagnostics or tests, they will come together. And that what we have already seen by the major device manufacturers is integrating those tests. I have long believed that it is that integration that really makes the difference in diagnostics being used. So I think that you will see more IVDs embedded in devices so that the patient and the physician don't have to do the system twice. And hopefully it's lower cost. That I'm not convinced of in the short term, but hopefully.
Yeah, and just to add to that, another key trend that's going on is, labs especially have both hospitals and health system labs as well as large independent laboratories have over-invested in diagnostics technologies over the last 3 to 4 years, especially driven by the demand due to COVID, and have now started looking at how do they really automate it. And that's where I think, Mara, to your point, AI and automation and software and digital technologies play a huge role in driving efficiencies in the workflows there. Another interesting question is, how are the financial market conditions directing your current investment strategy and any change for the year ahead? What are the investment goals?
So it's an important factor. And what it has meant for us at Illumina Ventures, but frankly, every venture capital firm, is the need to do follow-on financing for your existing companies. Only the very, very best and most established companies have been able to access the capital markets. So coming with existing equity owners in venture capital and private equity has meant continuing to fund these companies to get to the next milestone. It's also meant fewer, at least in 2023, many fewer acquisitions and cash out situations. I expect this, and again, maybe I'm naive, but I think pharma tends to be first in terms of how it's coming back in the market. And we saw today yet another pharma pharma acquisition. I believe it was AstraZeneca for another $2 million. So I'm bullish and excited about 2024 because pharma has shown that they're willing to write checks at real premiums. Diagnostics is typically a laggard, and I think it will move forward in a positive way in 2024. People talk about the elections. I think in healthcare, it's less relevant in terms of M&A. Will it change our investment strategy? Not really. We're really focused on the best of opportunities in Genomics 3.0, including very new companies. So we're still excited. And I know from what I've seen, there are still many, many entrepreneurs starting new companies.
Thank you. A couple more. As we see testing happening through less invasive fluids and possible easier collection methods via point of care, do we see primary care office being elevated or eliminated?
It'd be too easy to say both. I don't think it's going to be eliminated. There's still people who are not going to do it at home under any circumstance. And by the way, that's not just, quote, older people as I get older, but it is a wide swath of people who have complex diseases or just don't want to do it at home. So I don't see any time, pretty much ever, well, it's scary to say ever, that the primary care will be eliminated. I think that it'll be elevated in the sense that, like Eric Topol talks about it, it will be much more sophisticated care, hopefully, because the physician won't have to spend the time in saying, what are the basics that you have? Earlier, just within the last year, there was a test, for instance, approved for point of care of the difference between bacterial infections and viral infections. If physicians would use that sort of test, they don't have to start with, you don't need an antibiotic, or you do. So hopefully the level of care will be elevated, but I think we're a long time there. The challenge is, and I've also been very public about this, is we need to better educate our physicians. The new physicians in medical school, and I desperately want diagnostics to be part of the boarding for continuing medical education credits. Right now it's not, and physicians need to know how to use these new tests.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, and especially knowing the physician, some of the physicians personally, they're not typically the ones that are prone to like change so easily. So to be able to kind of help them through that process, educating them is really important. Another question is, what does the reimbursement landscape look like for diagnostics in the hospitals? Are hospitals still able to bill individually for those diagnostics, or are those costs now bundled into the DRG codes?
Well, Sujay, you may be able to answer the details here. I'm not a reimbursement expert, but there are many, many tests that are able to be included in the DRG codes. There's nothing in particular that's changed that in the short term. I think depending on how the LDT decision goes forward, if they become IVDs, it is likely to be easier to bill, not harder. but we're a long way before that goes into effect and there's a transition time. Otherwise, I don't know of any other changes, but you may be more educated than I.
Yeah, and Robert, happy to connect with you offline because this requires probably a more detailed conversation as reimbursement landscape within diagnostics is not that straightforward, unlike other medical devices. So happy to connect and provide any context and bring some of our reimbursement experts as well. Mara, another question is, how do you anticipate expanded Medicare Part B coverage and, broadly speaking, more patients under managed care impacting diagnostics volumes, coverage, likelihood, and test mix?
Again, I'm going to put this over to you in terms of the specifics there, but the same kind of answer. It's very complex as to what's included and what's not included in Medicare Part B.
Yeah. This is probably the last one. After the US and Europe, what is the next region with the most significant capital allocation in the diagnostic segment?
That is interesting. Well, in big regions, I think there are two things to think about. One is in the Middle East. Many of the countries in the Middle East have had aggressive campaigns to increase their clinical research, diagnostics, therapeutics impact. Particularly Saudi Arabia and some of the other Middle Eastern countries have been aggressive. Israel is another one, which has always had a very high test per capita rate compared to the rest of the world in the past. But many of the areas in the rest of the world have increased their focus on cutting edge diagnostics, therapeutics, and treatment.
Awesome. I think that was the last question from the audience. Yeah, I think that was the last one. So thank you, Mara, and again, Nicole and Mass Medic team. Really appreciate the partnership here, and thanks for hosting. Nicole, if there are no further questions, I'll pass it over to you for closing remarks.
Fantastic. I would too like to say thank you to Mara and Sujay for your time and your expertise. What an interesting presentation. Lots to learn, lots to look forward to. So really appreciate your time and your expertise. Also, thank you to everyone who joined us today. You will receive a copy of this recording and the slides. We'll be sending out an email after this webinar. And we encourage you to go to massmedic.com and look at all the great events we have coming up. Thank you again to Deloitte for hosting today's webinar. We cannot put on this expert content without support from partners like you. So thank you. Have a great day. We'll see you next time.
Stay well out there.